In March of 2020, thanks to the novel coronavirus, all of the Mopar shows came to a screeching halt. Over the last 90 days while quarantined from this virus, we've all watched the world descend into some sort of pre-apocalyptic caricature of itself. We now have 11% unemployment, riots in most major cities, and an all-out assault on anything American. Not even churches have been immune from this anarchy and vandalism. For those of us into the Mopar scene, we desperately needed a return to normalcy. Chrysler's at Carlisle was poised to be our flag, so to speak, on the top of the mountain of whatever that new normal was to look like. 4 weeks prior to Chrysler's at Carlisle, the state of Pennsylvania filed an injunction to halt Spring Carlisle, an all-makes swap meet, just 24 hours prior to that event. Carlisle Productions fought back in court and won their rights to hold events on their property, opening the door for the 2020 Mopar event scheduled for mid-July to go forward. The whole Mopar world crossed its fingers.
My name is Robert Wolf from Mopar Collector's Guide magazine. For the last 30 plus years I've gone to Mopar car shows to find the most interesting people and cars there are in the Mopar world. This month we're doing something a little different. For the last 90 days I've been cooped up, like most of you, and been thinking about how we enhance the MCG experience. So going forward we will still have the print magazine just like we've always had, and the in-depth stories we find at the shows will end up in that magazine. The difference will be, in between the magazine, I'll do a video like this each month that will highlight the shows themselves, show how the show came off, show some interesting highlights from the shows, and kind of keep people up to date on what's next. So for this month, we're at Chrysler's at Carlisle 2020, the first Mopar show since a pandemic, and so it's going to be very interesting to see what this thing looks like. As far as I'm concerned, the day that the government allowed protesters by the thousands in the streets all across America, it was show on. Never in the history of the United States has the government forced its citizens not to be able to peacefully assemble. And after all, that's what a car show is, right? Chrysler's at Carlisle taking place was something the entire car world needed. It proved we as citizens and businesses were able to stand up to an oppressive government and slip out from under its boot. Make our own decisions as to the risk of gathering in a crowd of more than 50, and exercise our First Amendment rights. Chrysler at Carlisle this year was not just a car show, it was a reset of constitutionality. Whatever this first car show looked like after a forced pandemic shutdown, it would dictate what the rest of the Mopar shows will look like going forward. The numbers I was given going into this year's car show was that pre-reg car show entries were trending 9% down. Now, if this year's show was only 9% off during the worst pandemic in recent history, then that would be fantastic, but I don't think that was the case. Chrysler's at Carlisle attendance is made up of 3 different groups: car show, vendor, and walkthrough at the gate. When I factored all of those together, I believe a realistic number of how far off this year's show was compared to last, in my opinion, would have to be a solid 35% off. From a business perspective, Thursday's traffic was great. Friday right where it should have been, and Saturday was a disaster, way off. And then Sunday back up to where one would expect it to be. Our rough count is that our sales were down 18% over last year, which with everything considered, I'm quite happy with. So why were our sales only 18% down? Because many vendors opted out of this year's show, making it better for those that came. What's behind the fall off? I believe that 50% of it was from older patrons that didn't want to risk getting sick. Another 10% didn't want to risk being forced into quarantine when they came back home. Add another 5% of people that were just unsure that the show was actually going to happen and had problem getting hotels and travel arrangements. As for the balance, foreigners, especially Canadians, that were unable to get across the shutdown border crossing. So putting it all in perspective, I've come to this stunning conclusion, that even with this year's drop in attendance at Chrysler's at Carlisle, it was a bigger Mopar show than any other one in 2019, with the exception of Chrysler's at Carlisle. Think about that for a moment. Thanks for joining me this month on YouTube from the center of the Mopar world. My name is Robert Wolf, and until next month, I'll see you on the pages of MCG.